Sophia Johnson, a talented writer specializing in social issues, was always known for her intelligence and composure. But on what seemed like an ordinary flight, she was humiliated in front of everyone by a flight attendant simply because of her full-figured appearance. When she was forced to leave her seat without any justifiable reason, Sophia realized this was not just a minor incident, it was a battle to defend her dignity. She decided to stand up for herself, but her adversary, Elanor, a tough and prejudiced flight attendant, was not willing to back down easily. Can Sophia confront prejudice and reclaim her respect, or will she be crushed under the weight of scrutinizing gazes and wielded authority? And can Elanor, who seemed like an enemy, find the capacity for change within herself? Behind conflict lies the opportunity for understanding. Behind injustice lies the power of struggle. Step into this deeply emotional and inspiring journey. Sophia Johnson adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, her eyes fixed on the large electronic departure board displaying outgoing flights. The lines of information appeared and disappeared in a steady rhythm, but her mind refused to focus. Flight BA216 to London, Gate C15, she murmured to herself, as if to remind herself of the details. At that moment, she felt both nervous and excited. Part of her felt like she was standing at the threshold of a great opportunity, the other part trembled at the thought of being subjected to judgmental stares and evaluations. Sophia took a deep breath and walked toward the boarding gate. Her small suitcase clattered against the tiled floor, breaking the quiet ambience of the waiting area. She wore a light gray dress that hugged her frame, paired with a thin jacket and outfit that was polished enough to leave a good impression, but still comfortable for a long flight. People meeting Sophia for the first time often noticed her figure full, rounded, with curves that society frequently associates with the word unhealthy. However, Sophia had learned to live with that, or at least she pretended she did. She knew that with her deep brown skin and fuller figure, she was often the subject of whispered judgments forming silently in the minds of others. At Gate C15, Sophia spotted Marcus Hall, her close friend and unofficial advisor, leaning against the wall, scrolling through his phone. Marcus had a tall, slim frame, honey-toned skin, and bright eyes that seemed to hold a wealth of intriguing secrets. He exuded a confidence that Sophia often felt she lacked. "Right on time as always," Marcus remarked as he noticed Sophia approaching, flashing her a reassuring smile. He picked up her suitcase and placed it neatly next to his own. "There's nothing to worry about this time. You've been preparing for this for months." Sophia offered a faint smile and shook her head. "I know, I've practiced this presentation hundreds of times, but I still feel like something's missing. Or maybe I'm the one missing confidence." "The only thing you're missing is faith in yourself," Marcus replied firmly. "This is a topic you know better than anyone. You've lived it, you've written about it, you know how to fight for it. And trust me, Sophia, no one is more qualified to speak on this than you." Sophia sighed, trying to let Marcus's words sink in. But the truth was, her fear wasn't just about the presentation. She was used to being well prepared, used to building strong arguments, and defending herself with intellect. What she wasn't used to was the staring eyes, the hushed whispers, and the faint smirks she so often endured because of her appearance and the color of her skin. "Come on, don't make that face," Marcus said with a laugh, breaking into her thoughts. "If you aren't confident, who's going to convince the organizers that your book matters? You're representing something much bigger than yourself. Remember that." "You're right," Sophia said, nodding as a faint smile crossed her lips. But then her expression clouded over again. "Marcus, have you ever felt like, no matter how hard you try, people still see you through the lens of their own prejudice?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, then replied softly, "Of course I have. But I don't let it control me. And you shouldn't let it control you either. Now, let's board the plane, Sophia. Don't let your thoughts wear you out before the flight even starts." Sophia and Marcus quickly settled into their seats in the emergency exit row. Marcus had deliberately chosen this spot in advance because of the extra legroom. He knew Sophia would feel more comfortable here even if she didn't say it out loud. He understood that her long legs and full-figured frame needed a bit more space to move freely. "An emergency exit row?" Sophia asked softly as she sat down, feeling a little uneasy. "Does this mean I'm responsible for opening the door if something happens to the plane?" "Exactly," Marcus joked. "And I bet you'd do a better job than anyone else on this flight." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Sophia said with a laugh. Though it was meant as a joke, she couldn't quite shake the lingering sense of nervousness. Sophia fastened her seatbelt, her eyes glancing around the airplane cabin. The passengers nearby seemed preoccupied with their own activities, a small family whispering quietly to one another, a young businessman focused on his laptop screen, and a middle-aged woman engrossed in a book. Yet, somewhere in the air, Sophia could still feel certain gazes lingering on her longer than necessary. She leaned her head back against the seat, closed her eyes, and tried to focus on the presentation she had meticulously prepared. But before she could fully relax, a woman's voice suddenly spoke beside her. "Hello, I'm Elanor, the flight attendant on this flight." Sophia opened her eyes and looked up. Standing before her was a woman with a stern face, blonde hair neatly tied into a bun, and a piercing gaze. She wore the navy blue flight attendant uniform, but instead of the friendliness Sophia had expected, her tone was sharp and unpleasant. "Are you aware that you're sitting in the emergency exit row?" Elanor asked, her eyes scanning Sophia from head to toe. "Yes, I'm aware," Sophia replied, striving to keep her tone calm. Elanor continued to stare at her for several seconds, her cold eyes unwavering. "Are you sure you're capable of handling an emergency situation?" The question not only caught Sophia off guard but also made Marcus, seated next to her, stiffen. He immediately spoke up. "We've already been briefed on the responsibilities of sitting here. There's no issue at all." But Elanor seemed to ignore Marcus entirely. She kept her gaze locked on Sophia and then raised her voice, as though ensuring the other passengers could hear. "To be honest, I don't think you're suitable to sit here. For safety reasons, I'm going to move you to another seat." For a brief moment, Sophia felt her face flush hot with blood. She knew exactly what those words were implying. She had heard them hundreds of times in different forms, from insensitive jokes to outright cruel remarks. "Excuse me," Sophia said, her tone calm yet firm. "I don't believe I have any issues sitting here. I am fully capable of following instructions in case of an emergency." Elanor didn't respond, but her eyebrow arched slightly, as if issuing a silent challenge. "I'm going to have to ask you to switch seats. It's regulation," she stated flatly. The airplane cabin fell into an unusual silence. The atmosphere seemed to freeze as Sophia and Elanor faced each other, their gazes locking in a tension so thick that even the passengers nearby began to take notice. Eleanor's words still echoed in Sophia's mind, each one cutting through her sense of dignity like a small, sharp blade. I'm asking you to change seats," Elanor repeated, her tone rigid but slightly quieter this time, perhaps in an attempt to lessen the attention she had inadvertently drawn. Sophia raised her head, her deep eyes meeting Eleanor's icy stare. Inside, she wrestled with two conflicting thoughts, one urging her to stay quiet and avoid trouble, the other screaming at her to not tolerate this injustice for another second. Marcus, seated next to her, shifted uneasily. He opened his mouth to say something, but Sophia gently touched his hand, stopping him. She knew Marcus wanted to defend her, but this was her battle, and Sophia wanted to handle it on her own. "I've made myself clear," Sophia responded, striving to keep her tone as calm as possible. "I am fully capable and qualified to sit in this seat. I don't see any reason why I need to move." Elanor raised an eyebrow, her dissatisfaction evident on her face. "I don't think you understand the issue here. This is an emergency exit row. It requires a passenger who can respond quickly and is physically fit to handle emergency situations. I'm just following safety regulations." "Are you implying that I'm unfit simply because of my appearance?" Sophia asked, her voice still quiet but each word deliberate and heavy. "I want to know specifically what makes you think I can't fulfill my role in an emergency." Marcus turned to Sophia, pride shining in his eyes. He knew she had decided not to back down. Elanor opened her mouth to respond, but at that moment, the attention of nearby passengers began to grow. A woman seated directly behind Sophia whispered something to her husband, and several curious glances were now directed their way. Not wanting to escalate the situation further, Elanor reluctantly backed off. "I'll arrange another seat for you. Please follow my instructions," she said coldly before turning away without waiting for Sophia's response. Sophia followed Elanor down the narrow aisle, acutely aware of the stares tracking her every step. Even though no one spoke openly, she knew exactly what they were thinking. She could hear the murmurs, snippets of remarks she wished she could ignore, but couldn't completely shut out. "It's just a seat. Why is she making such a big deal out of it?" a man muttered to his companion. A wave of heat spread through Sophia's chest. None of them truly understood the pain these actions caused. It wasn't just about being asked to change seats, it was about being judged, diminished, and deemed unworthy simply because of her appearance. Elanor stopped at the back of the plane, pointing to an empty aisle seat. "This is your seat," she said before walking away immediately without another word. Sophia sat down, struggling to maintain her composure. She took a deep breath and looked out the small window beside her, where the last rays of sunlight were casting a golden glow over the sky. But no matter how hard she tried, the humiliation clung to her like a heavy cloak she couldn't shake off. Marcus moved to sit next to Sophia shortly after. He had asked to swap seats with another passenger, unwilling to let Sophia sit alone after everything that had just happened. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked gently, though the anger in his eyes was unmistakable. "No," Sophia admitted honestly. "But I will be." "You shouldn't have to go through this," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, steady tone. "That's not how a flight attendant should treat a passenger." Sophia gave a sad smile. "I know, but this isn't the first time I've dealt with something like this, Marcus. And it won't be the last." Marcus fell silent, hearing the exhaustion in her voice. He knew Sophia was strong, but even the strongest people couldn't carry everything on their own all the time. "So, you're just going to let this go?" he asked. Sophia looked at him. "No, I'm not going to let it slide. But not right now." Marcus studied her intently for a moment, then nodded. "You always have a plan, don't you?" "Yes," Sophia replied, her gaze shifting to the window. "If there's one thing I've learned from all the times I've been underestimated, it's this: the best way to respond isn't to yell or pound the table. It's to make them see, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they were wrong." Marcus chuckled, though the anger still lingered in his voice. "Well, let me know when you need a cheerleader by your side." Sophia felt the warmth of his support, and it made her feel a little less alone. A few minutes later, a soft voice spoke beside her. "Excuse me, could I talk to you for a moment?" Sophia turned and saw another flight attendant standing there. She was younger than Elanor, with neatly tied brown hair and a gentle smile. "My name is Claire," she said hesitantly. "I wanted to apologize for what just happened. I don't think you deserve that." Sophia looked at her, unable to hide her surprise. "Thank you," she said, her voice still uncertain, "but I don't think this is your responsibility." "Maybe not," Claire replied, lowering her voice. "But that doesn't mean I shouldn't do what's right. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to let me know." Sophia smiled, feeling a small sense of relief for the first time since boarding the plane. "I'll remember that," she said. On her. Amidst the curious stares and deep sense of humiliation, she faced a choice: remain silent and endure, or stand up and defend her dignity. The conflict had already begun, and Sophia understood that speaking up wasn't always easy. How would she confront this situation? Don't miss the next chapter to witness the explosion of this confrontation. Share your thoughts and continue following Sophia's journey. Sophia sat quietly in her seat at the back of the cabin, her eyes fixed on the small window beside her. The endless blue sky stretched out beyond, dotted with soft white clouds drifting lazily below. But her mind was a storm of chaos. Eleanor's words still echoed in her head, like hammer blows shattering the pieces of self-esteem she had worked so hard to build over the years. Marcus sat next to her, glancing at her silently. He knew Sophia needed time to process her emotions. Sophia wasn't the type to explode in anger easily. She often maintained an outward calm, but inside she was like a simmering volcano, waiting for the right moment to erupt. After a few minutes of silence, Sophia turned to Marcus. "I hate this feeling," she said, her voice quiet but sharp as a blade. "It feels like I have no worth, like I'm not even human." "You're not the problem," Sophia, Marcus replied, his tone steady and reassuring. "The problem is Elanor. She saw someone she thought she could look down on, and she abused her authority to do it. But you know you're not what she sees, don't you?" Sophia looked at Marcus, a flicker of determination lighting up in her eyes. "I know, and I'm not going to let this pass as just another instance of mistreatment. But I have to handle it my way." "Then do it," Marcus said. "And if you need me, I'll be here to help you." Not long after, Claire returned with a glass of water on her tray. She placed it on the table in front of Sophia, bent down slightly, and spoke in a soft voice. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. If you don't mind, I'd like to help." Sophia raised an eyebrow, a little surprised. "You want to help me?" Claire nodded. "I know this isn't fair. I saw how Elanor treated you, and I've been on the receiving end of her attitude too. Even as her colleague, I still feel uneasy whenever she uses her authority to make others feel small." Sophia went silent. She hadn't expected Claire, a flight attendant, to speak up about something like this. "Aren't you afraid?" If you speak out, won't Elanor make things difficult for you? Claire sighed. I've thought about that. But if I stay silent, I'll become part of the problem. I don't want to live with the feeling that I stood by and did nothing. Sophia offered a faint smile, sensing the sincerity in Claire's words. So, how do you plan to help me? Lowering her voice, Claire glanced around to make sure no one was listening. You can report this to the captain. James Carter, the captain of this flight, is a very principled man. If he hears about what happened, Elanor will have to face the consequences. And I'll be more than willing to serve as a witness if you need me. Sophia nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope break through what had seemed like an impossible situation. Thank you, Claire. Just knowing that you're on my side means so much. You deserve to be treated better than this, Claire replied, her eyes filled with empathy. I'll check back with you if you need any further support. As Claire walked away, Sophia turned to Marcus. I think I know what I need to do now, Marcus nodded. Do you need me to do anything? Just stay here and keep reminding me that I'm doing the right thing, Sophia said. Marcus smiled. That I can do. Sophia took a deep breath, feeling a bit lighter thanks to Claire's support. She opened her phone and quickly began to document everything that had happened in the past few hours, noting every word and action from Elanor. She knew how crucial it was to have clear evidence and detailed information when filing a complaint. This wasn't just about standing up for herself, it was an opportunity to send a larger message. Abuse of power like this could not be tolerated. Once she finished writing, she straightened up and pressed the call button for the flight attendant. A moment later, Claire appeared. How can I help you, Sophia? I'd like to report this situation to the captain, Sophia said, her voice steady but calm. Claire looked at her, respect evident in her eyes. I'll arrange it right away. Would you like me to come with you? Sophia nodded. Thank you. I think having you there would be a big help. Within minutes, Sophia and Claire were escorted to the front of the plane. Another flight attendant guided them to meet Captain James Carter, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and kind but serious eyes. He stood as Sophia entered, extending a hand toward her. Hello, I'm James Carter, the captain of this flight. Claire mentioned that you wanted to speak with me about an important matter. Yes, Captain, Sophia said as she shook his hand. I'm sorry to bother you, but I feel this is an issue that needs to be addressed immediately. James gestured for Sophia to take a seat, then turned to Claire. Please stay. I want to hear both sides. Sophia began recounting everything that had happened, down to the smallest details, the way Elanor looked at her, the condescending tone, and the unnecessary demand for her to switch seats. Claire nodded in agreement as Sophia spoke, even adding details Sophia hadn't noticed herself, such as how Elanor had deliberately spoken loudly so that the nearby passengers could hear. James listened intently, his brow furrowing with each new detail. When Sophia finished, he nodded, his expression more serious than before. I see. First of all, I'd like to apologize to you on behalf of the crew. This behavior does not align with the standards of our airline. Sophia felt a weight lift from her shoulders, but she knew this was only the first step. James turned to Claire. Thank you for providing an honest account of what happened. I'll need to speak privately with Elanor after the flight. But for now, I'll reassign her duties to ensure everything runs smoothly. Claire nodded. Thank you, Captain. James turned back to Sophia. Please rest assured, this matter will not be overlooked. If you'd like, I can file a direct report with the airline's complaint department. Thank you. That really means a lot to me, Sophia said, a faint smile breaking across her face for the first time that day. Sophia returned to her seat with Marcus after her meeting with Captain James Carter. Her heart was still pounding, not out of fear, but from the sense of release. She had done the right thing. This time she hadn't stayed silent or endured the humiliation like before. She had stood up not with shouting or anger, but with calmness and firm reasoning. Yet deep down she knew the storm wasn't entirely over. Marcus looked at her as she sat back down, his expression curious but supportive. How did it go? Sophia let out a long breath. I think it went well. The captain listened, and Claire backed me up. But I know this isn't over yet, right? Marcus said, his eyes scanning the cabin briefly. Elanor might not let this go so easily. She doesn't have the authority anymore, Sophia replied, though she wasn't entirely convinced. Elanor had wielded her power as she saw fit, and Sophia knew that people like her rarely admitted fault or gave in without a fight. Meanwhile, Elanor stood near the galley at the front of the plane, clutching a small towel tightly in her hands. Her insides churned like a boiling pot about to overflow. What had Sophia done? Reported her to the captain, and Claire. How dare she, someone Elanor had always dismissed as a rookie who didn't understand the dynamics of the job side with a passenger instead of her own colleague. Elanor wasn't just angry, she felt betrayed. Since when did passengers have the right to put her in a situation like this? And since when did a black woman, with a body that didn't fit the standards, dare to challenge her authority? Elanor glanced around the cabin, trying to maintain a neutral demeanor, but she could feel the passengers' eyes on her. Some gazes were curious, others judgmental, and a few even seemed disdainful. The whispers had already begun to ripple through the rows. She doesn't seem very professional. What did she do to make a passenger go to the captain? Elanor knew this incident could tarnish her reputation, both with the passengers and her colleagues. For a fleeting moment, she considered speaking up to defend herself, to explain her side of the story. But she couldn't. Captain James Carter, a man known for his fairness and strict discipline, wouldn't tolerate her stirring up further trouble. Sophia, meanwhile, could sense the shift in the atmosphere of the cabin. The cheerful chatter and relaxed conversations from earlier had faded away. In their place was an undercurrent of tension, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. The looks from other passengers, once indifferent, now carried a mix of curiosity and surprisingly empathy. The middle-aged woman sitting near Sophia leaned over and whispered, "I saw what happened earlier. You were very brave to speak up." Sophia turned to her, slightly surprised. "Thank you," she replied. "But I just did what I felt was necessary." The woman smiled warmly. "You did the right thing. Sometimes we need to speak up to protect ourselves. And you did it with such admirable composure." The woman's words brought Sophia a small sense of relief. But she also realized that the incident had spread throughout the cabin. The stares, the whispers, all of it reminded her that her actions had become the center of attention. After a stretch of quiet, Claire reappeared, this time with a calm but resolute expression. She leaned down towards Sophia and spoke softly. "The captain has spoken with Elanor. She's being temporarily removed from passenger service for the remainder of the flight." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Claire explained, "she won't be allowed to interact with passengers for the rest of this flight. The captain has reassigned her duties. The rest of us will take over her responsibilities. That's his decision." Sophia felt a faint breeze of relief pass through her mind. She hadn't expected such swift and decisive action from James Carter. This wasn't a complete victory, but it was an important first step. "What about after the flight?" Marcus interjected, breaking into the conversation. Claire hesitated for a moment, then replied, "The captain will file an official report with the airline. As for Elanor, she may have to face an internal investigation. It all depends on how the management decides to handle it." Sophia nodded slightly but didn't say anything further. She didn't want to celebrate too soon because she knew that situations like these didn't always lead to clear outcomes. But at the very least, she had sent a message she wasn't someone who would quietly accept injustice. Elanor was fully aware that she had been demoted temporarily during this flight. While the captain hadn't explicitly stated it, the fact that Claire and the other attendants had taken over her duties was enough to make it clear. She paced back and forth in the galley, her face flushed with anger. "Just a passenger," she muttered under her breath. "Just someone who didn't want to follow the rules." But deep down, Elanor knew this wasn't about rules. This was about her complacency, her arrogance that had made her believe she had the right to judge and belittle others. And this time it had backfired. She glanced through the galley door and saw Claire walking confidently through the cabin, her gentle smile reassuring passengers. To Elanor, Claire felt like a traitor, someone who had dared to break the unspoken rules between colleagues. Fine, Elanor thought to herself, her eyes cold and calculating. This isn't over. Meanwhile, Sophia noticed a distinct shift in the atmosphere around her. Not everyone openly supported her, but many passengers started smiling at her as she looked their way, a subtle show of empathy. Some passengers whispered to each other, but instead of criticism, Sophia overheard comments like, "It's good someone stood up. That flight attendant really behaved unprofessionally." Once again, Sophia felt a quiet sense of relief creeping into her mind. This wasn't just her fight. Her actions had sparked empathy and understanding among others, and that made her resistance feel meaningful. Elanor had been temporarily removed from her duties, but the anger within her remained unresolved. Meanwhile, Sophia began to feel the support of the passengers around her, realizing that her voice had the power to create a ripple of change. Yet, beneath the surface, tension still simmered, and the storm was far from over. The conflict between Sophia and Elanor had reached a boiling point, and both of them knew this was no simple incident. Can Sophia hold her ground? Share your thoughts with us, and don't miss the next chapter to see how it all unfolds. Elanor stood in the galley at the front of the plane, trying to keep her face composed, but inside, her anger simmered like hot embers. She was used to being in control, to using sharp words to assert her authority over passengers. But this time, she had not only lost control but also felt her position being threatened. It wasn't just about Sophia, it was also about Claire, the young colleague who had dared to speak out against her. Elanor peeked through the galley door. Claire was chatting with a passenger in the middle row, her face bright and friendly. Meanwhile, Sophia sat quietly at the back of the plane, talking to her travel companion Marcus. The way Sophia had held her ground without ever raising her voice made Elanor more uncomfortable than she had ever felt. Just a passenger, Elanor repeated to herself, like a mantra she hoped would calm her. But that justification couldn't extinguish the fire of anger burning inside her. Elanor knew full well that this incident wouldn't just end here. At the back of the plane, Sophia sat next to Marcus, trying to focus on reading a book but finding it impossible. Her thoughts kept circling back to the earlier incident. While she felt satisfied with how she had handled the situation and appreciated Claire's support, part of her still felt uneasy. Would her actions actually lead to change? Or would this simply become a small event that everyone would quickly forget? "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, breaking into her thoughts. "I don't know," Sophia answered honestly. "I know I did the right thing. But part of me still feels like everyone is staring at me, like I'm being judged." Marcus shook his head. "Not everyone is judging you. You've seen it yourself. There are people who empathize with you, who even respect how you handled the situation." Sophia gave him a small smile. "Thank you. Maybe I should focus on the positives." Meanwhile, at the front of the plane, Captain James Carter was reviewing the report Claire had written about the incident. He read each line carefully, his face thoughtful and serious. James was a man of principle. He firmly believed that everyone on his team, from pilots to flight attendants, should prioritize professionalism and respect for passengers above all else. As he reached the section where Claire described Eleanor's behavior, raising her voice and using her authority to humiliate Sophia, he felt a deep sense of disappointment. "It's time to set things straight," he muttered to himself. A few minutes later, a crew member stepped into the galley where Elanor was standing. "The captain wants to speak with you in the cockpit," he said curtly. Elanor tried to mask her unease, nodded, and quickly walked away. When she entered the cockpit area, she saw Captain James Carter seated behind his small desk, his hands resting on a stack of documents. "Elanor, please have a seat," he said, his tone calm but unmistakably firm. Elanor sat down, trying to maintain her composure. "Captain, I can explain." "That won't be necessary," James interrupted, his gaze sharp. "I've heard from both sides, and I've also reviewed Claire's report. Your behavior toward the passenger was unacceptable." "But Captain," Elanor said, her voice tinged with protest, "I was simply following safety regulations. I didn't think she was suitable to sit in the emergency exit row." "That's not the issue here," Elanor, James replied, his tone hardening. "The issue is how you handled the situation. Instead of explaining and resolving it professionally, you chose to raise your voice and humiliate a passenger in front of the entire cabin. Do you understand that?" Elanor remained silent. For the first time, she didn't know what to say. "Our job is to serve the passengers and ensure their safety," James continued. "But that does not give us the right to abuse our authority." He leaned forward slightly, his expression unwavering. "I will include this incident in my formal report, and the airline will address it through proper channels. For now, you will remain in the galley and will not participate in any passenger service for the remainder of this flight." Elanor clenched her fists, feeling a mix of humiliation and anger. But she couldn't argue. She knew how principled James Carter was. When Elanor returned to the galley, bitterness swelled in her chest. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with her colleagues or the passengers. But soon, the very thing she wanted to avoid the most happened. Sophia walked toward the galley to get some water. Elanor immediately felt uncomfortable. She turned away and pretended to be busy rearranging a few cups on a tray. But Sophia didn't ignore her presence. "Elanor," Sophia said, her voice calm but firm. Elanor froze. then turned around, her gaze icy. "What do you want?" "I don't want to start a conflict with you," Sophia replied, her tone clear and confident. "But I think you need to understand that the way you treat passengers doesn't just hurt them, it damages your own image as well." Elanor smirked, attempting to be dismissive. "I don't need you to teach me how to do my job. Maybe you're right." "I don't need to," Sophia replied, meeting Eleanor's gaze directly. "But I hope you understand that with power comes responsibility. And next time, when you think about judging someone based on their appearance or anything else, remember that no one deserves to be humiliated just because they don't fit into your expectations." Elanor didn't respond, but her expression softened slightly. She said nothing, turning away and walking back into the galley. Sophia stood there for a few moments, taking a deep breath before returning to her seat. She didn't know if her words had any impact on Elanor, but at least she had tried. As the flight prepared to land, the tension in the cabin had noticeably eased. Claire approached Sophia, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for standing up for yourself," she said softly. "I think what you did will leave a lasting impression on everyone." Sophia smiled. "Thank you, Claire. And thank you for helping me. I couldn't have done this without you." When the plane touched down, Sophia felt an unusual sense of relief. This wasn't just a flight, it had been a battle for dignity, for fairness. And this time she knew she had won. The plane began its descent, and the gentle announcements from the cockpit reminded passengers to fasten their seatbelts and prepare for landing. The sky outside shifted from deep blue to a pale gray as lower clouds rolled past like soft blankets. Sophia gazed out the window, her expression thoughtful. This wasn't the first time she had faced prejudice, but this time was different. She hadn't stayed silent, hadn't endured the humiliation quietly. She had stood up, carrying both her pain and her strength. She felt an unfamiliar lightness, as though an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Claire passed by Sophia's row and offered her a small smile. "Are you doing okay, Sophia?" "Better than I thought I would," Sophia replied, smiling back at Claire. "Thank you for standing by me. I know that wasn't easy for you." "No need to thank me," Claire said. "You did the right thing, and it was admirable. I think you've made a lot of people reconsider not just Elanor, but other passengers as well." Sophia nodded, a wave of gratitude swelling within her. Claire, an unexpected ally, had restored her faith in kindness amid the challenges she had faced. "So, how's Elanor doing?" Sophia asked, unable to hide her curiosity. Claire hesitated for a moment before responding. "She's staying in the galley at the front, avoiding contact with the passengers. I think she's going to face a lot of questions once the flight is over. But the captain made it clear that the airline won't tolerate behavior like that." Sophia said nothing more. She knew that Elanor would have to take responsibility for her own actions. As the plane continued its descent, some passengers began standing to retrieve their luggage before the seatbelt sign had even been turned off. A middle-aged woman sitting in a row near Sophia turned around and smiled at her. "You did very well," the woman said. "I've been watching everything from the start. That took a lot of courage." Sophia smiled back. "Thank you. I just did what anyone should do." The woman shook her head. "No, not everyone would have done what you did. Most of us would just stay silent and let it pass. But you didn't. You made a difference." Those words warmed Sophia's heart. She realized that, however small, her actions had meant something not just to her but to others as well. Marcus, seated beside her, teased lightly, "You're the hero of this flight now. Time to start signing copies of your book for everyone." Sophia laughed, shaking her head. "I just want to get to the hotel and rest." At the front of the plane, Elanor sat quietly in a corner of the galley. The captain's words still echoed in her mind. She knew this wasn't just a minor incident, this could have significant consequences for her career. The anger she felt still simmered inside her, but now it was mixed with a sense of unease. She knew Sophia had been right, with power comes responsibility, and in this case she had let her personal frustrations overshadow her professional duties. Elanor wasn't a bad person, she knew that. But the pressures and wounds she had carried over the years in her job had turned her into someone she barely recognized, and now she had to face the consequences. The plane finally touched down, a gentle vibration rippling through the cabin as the wheels met the runway. Scattered applause broke out from a few passengers, a familiar sign of relief at the end of a safe flight. Sophia exhaled deeply, unbuckling her seatbelt and standing to grab her luggage. Marcus helped her with her small suitcase, and the two joined the line of passengers moving toward the exit. As they stepped out of the plane, Sophia caught a glimpse of Elanor standing off to the side, her face still stoic but her eyes showing a flicker of uncertainty. The two briefly made eye contact, but neither said a word. Sophia knew she had said enough, and now it was up to Elanor to reflect on her actions. Stepping into the airport terminal, Sophia felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Though exhausted, she realized that this flight wasn't just a journey to London, it was also a lesson in courage, in standing up for herself, and in the power of kindness. Marcus walked beside her, raising an eyebrow. "So, what's your next plan? A big presentation, or maybe writing another book about this flight?" Sophia laughed. "Maybe both. But first I need coffee." The two stepped outside, blending into the crisp afternoon air of London. Sophia felt as though the clouds in her mind had finally cleared. In a quiet corner of the airport, Elanor exited through the staff doors, clutching her handbag tightly. Her thoughts were racing. Would she be able to keep her job? Could she truly change the way she treated passengers and colleagues? As she passed through the bustling crowd, she paused briefly, spotting Sophia and Marcus in the distance. She felt an unfamiliar emotion, not anger, but recognition. Elanor took a deep breath and continued walking, a single thought filling her mind: perhaps it was time for her to change. 2 months after the unforgettable flight, Sophia sat in a small cafe in the heart of New York City, quietly watching golden leaves fall outside the window. Her laptop rested on the table in front of her, the screen displaying a half-finished article. It was a piece for a prestigious magazine, where she'd been invited to contribute after her book unexpectedly became a hot topic in cultural and social discussions. The flight from New York to London had become more than just a personal experience. After the conference, Sophia had written a short article about the incident, reflecting on how societal biases about appearance and authority could influence how people treated one another. To her surprise, the article garnered widespread attention, sparking lively discussions in communities about appearance discrimination and abuse of power. Sophia smiled as she thought about how a seemingly small incident could spark such significant change. She reached for her cup, taking a sip of coffee and letting its warmth spread through her. "Excuse me, Sophia Johnson." The familiar voice stopped Sophia mid-sip. She looked up, her eyes widening as she saw who stood before her: Elanor McCarthy. Elanor looked completely different from the last time Sophia had seen her. The sharp, formal flight attendant uniform had been replaced with a soft cream-colored sweater and dark jeans. Her face no longer carried the cold, haughty expression Sophia remembered. Instead, there was something gentler, almost hesitant, in her demeanor. "Hello," Elanor said, her voice low and a bit hesitant. "I didn't think we'd meet again, but I saw you sitting here and I wanted to come talk to you." Sophia straightened up in her seat, surprised but not showing any negative reaction. "Elanor, it's surprising to see you here. How are you?" Elanor sat down in the chair across from Sophia, her hands gripping her coffee cup as if searching for a sense of security. I'm okay. But what I really wanted to say is, thank you." "For what?" Sophia asked, raising her eyebrows slightly. Elanor looked Sophia directly in the eyes, her gaze filled with sincerity. "After that flight, I had to face the consequences. The captain filed a report, and the airline required me to attend a training program on how to treat passengers. At first, I was furious. I thought everyone was blowing things out of proportion, that I was just doing my job." She paused for a moment, as if gathering the courage to continue. "But during that program, we had to listen to stories from passengers who had been hurt by how they were treated by airline staff. And there was one story that I couldn't stop thinking about. It was yours. You made me realize that I hadn't just hurt you, I had hurt myself and the values of the job I once loved." Sophia listened in silence. Her gaze softened, though she maintained her composure. "I never wanted to hurt you, Elanor. All I wanted was to be treated with respect as a human being." "I understand," Elanor said, her voice lowering. "And I'm sorry for what I did. My words, my actions, all of it was wrong. You didn't deserve that. No one does." Sophia took a sip of her coffee, her eyes still fixed on Elanor. "What made you change your perspective? What made you truly see the issue?" Elanor gave a small, sad smile. "After being reassigned from international flights, I was given a position in a smaller, less pressured environment. It gave me time to reflect on what I'd done. And then I remembered the look in your eyes on that flight, not anger, not hatred, but disappointment. I realized I had turned my job into a weapon to hurt others, instead of using it as a way to serve and help. Sophia nodded, feeling a sense of relief. Change isn't easy, Elanor, but at least you're willing to face it. That's something to be respected. Change isn't easy at all, Elanor agreed. But I know it's something I need to do, and I hope that one day I can regain the trust of the people I've hurt, including you. Sophia leaned forward, placing her hands gently on the table. Elanor, I don't hate you. I don't think you're a bad person. I think you were just lost, overwhelmed by pressure and emotions you couldn't control. I'm not the one who can decide if you've redeemed yourself, but I believe that if you truly want to change, you will. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the chance to apologize. Sophia smiled. Everyone deserves a chance to change. Just make sure you make the most of it. Elanor nodded, and for the first time during their conversation, a genuine smile appeared on her face. After a bit more talking, Elanor stood up, feeling lighter than she had in a long time. I won't take up more of your time. I just wanted to say that your story, and the way you stood up for yourself, it changed me. I hope we'll meet again under better circumstances. Sophia stood as well and extended her hand. I hope so too. Wishing you all the best, Elanor. As Elanor walked away, Sophia returned to her seat. Watching Elanor disappear into the crowd, Sophia felt a wave of warmth sweep over her. She had not only reclaimed her own right to be treated with respect, but had also helped someone else reflect on themselves and begin to change. Life is a long journey, and sometimes the most unexpected moments bring about the most meaningful changes. The flight was over, but the journeys of Sophia and Elanor continued, journeys of growth, courage, and forgiveness. Not everyone is willing to stand up against injustice, and not everyone is brave enough to confront their own mistakes. But when those moments happen, incredible transformations can begin. Sophia proved that a person's worth is not defined by their appearance, but by their inner strength and how they face adversity. And Elanor, though once lost, had found a path toward change, a reminder that everyone deserves a second chance. If you resonate with Sophia's courage, hit like. If you believe this story should be shared, share it with others. And subscribe to join us on more inspiring journeys ahead. Every click from you fuels our drive to bring you more meaningful stories like this one.